Thank you and welcome back. For this session, we're going to be looking at how eco-activism can actually help us save our planet. And we have two incredible panelists, and I'm going to be torturing them with questions for the next sort of 40 minutes and then opening it up to you. But what I want to do first was actually introduce both our guests because they are both incredible in their own right. So, Tshering Tobgay is a politician, environmentalist, cultural advocate, and leader of the People's Democratic Party. Between 2013 and 2018, he was the Prime Minister of Bhutan. He promotes the implementation of gross national happiness and highlights the problems that need to be addressed in his country and others, such as youth unemployment, corruption, national debt. He also was concentrating on trying to remove corruption from the Bhutan government. Tshering received his bachelor degree in mechanical engineering from Pittsburgh University after obtaining a scholarship from the UN. He then completed a master's degree at the incredibly famous John Kennedy School of Governance at Harvard. And prior to engaging in politics, he was a civil servant within Bhutan's government, and he became the first official to resign from his work to take part in his country's transition to parliamentary democracy in 2008. He has been a guest speaker worldwide, focusing on the impacts of climate change and highlighting Bhutan's pledge to remain carbon neutral as the country puts happiness before economic growth. I have to say it is incredibly amazing and we're very lucky to have him. Welcome. We also have Shooka Bidarian, who is a TV presenter, producer, climate activist. She creates documentaries and various environmental content for both the English and Farsi-speaking audiences worldwide, focusing mainly on the interconnection between human health and our healthy environment. Shooka produced the first ever climate change documentary in Farsi based on her experiences and interviews at COP26 in Glasgow. She is a climate reality mentor. You can see the little green ring on her shoulder. And she has received the Alfredo Circus Memorial Green Ring from the former US Vice President Al Gore. However, she was deeply upset that she wasn't able to receive it in person from him because of the pandemic. And this is what I love. So he basically phones her up and says, well, I'm going to be at Glasgow. Make sure you bring your award to Glasgow and I'll make sure that we take some photographs together. Yeah, as you do, okay. Hi, Al. Yeah, sure, I'll see you in Glasgow. Again, she's also a leader and a campaigner for the 100% Committed campaign in Europe, and she's a passionate climate activist and believes that taking care of the environment is the responsibility of every individual on the globe. Now, as I say, I'm going to be asking some pertinent questions and trying to extract information from these two incredible people. And I have to say, what I wanted to start with, if I may, is that both of you have had very different journeys, very different ways into activism. And I'd like to say that none of us are born activists, okay? We don't come out of the womb going, oh, I'm going to be an activist. But it's the events and people in the world that shape us. So, Tshering, can I ask, how did you become such an incredible activist? Oh, okay, Shooka, I'm sorry. He's passed the ball to you, you know, and I'm not going to argue with Tshering. Could we have some mics, please?
Yes, it is now. Thank you very much. Well, that was an excellent point you made there. None of us are born an activist, nor are we raised in an environmentally aware households. That's definitely the case for me. But I think it's never too late to change something like that. So my personal experience with climate change happened in 2011, where I felt and experienced the impacts of climate change firsthand. This was about 11 years ago, and at that time I was living in Thailand, a city near Bangkok, the capital city, when the great flood of 2011 hit the country. And I watched the water penetrating my home. I eventually had to evacuate and leave the city, rented a flat in Bangkok, but it was just a matter of time before Bangkok got flooded as well. So for nearly 2 months, I was basically trapped in my flat, and I would only go outside for the essentials every now and then. And even then, I had to wade through the flood water. And by that point, it was knee deep. So it was quite an intense experience, the flood itself. And that year, I remember the southwest monsoon arrived and started early in Thailand. And Thailand experienced record rainfall throughout March and April, and the flood lasted for months, and that was the worst flood the country has ever experienced in terms of the duration of the flood. And so obviously, when it was all happening, it was such a shocking crisis that I think we were all just trying to take it day by day. But it was after the flood that it suddenly hit me. It was experiencing the flood itself was just really tough, but to see the impacts of it on people's lives, livelihoods, jobs, and everything, people losing their family members and relatives, it was absolutely devastating. And although I was very much terrified and scared of what I just experienced for months in a foreign country, it was just that at the same time, that feeling of urgency and responsibility, I just couldn't help but keep telling myself, this cannot be it. We need to change this because this is affecting the most vulnerable and poorest people in a community, and this is just not right. So I decided not only to advance my knowledge about the climate crisis, but also to take action. And my activism formally started in 2014 through the Ian Somerhalder Foundation. And through that, I got to know and be introduced to the Climate Reality Project. So I have been working with the Climate Reality Project founded by the former US Vice President Al Gore since 2016.
Tshering, you have had an incredible career. I mean, when did climate change and that sense of urgency and action come into your life?
Thank you, Mark. And sorry for passing on the buck
No.
to Shooka. I did it only to get more people inside. You could see people walk by and then stop to see who's speaking. And I think we got a good several dozen people in. Thank you, Shooka. Another thing is, I'd much rather be out here. I've surveyed the whole hall, you know, from where Mark is sitting and where we are and you are. And this is really good. So thank you for joining us today. I'm not an activist. I'm not an environmentalist, climate change activist. If anything, I see myself as an advocate. We are in a dangerous space. We are in a dangerous place. If we are not careful, the future of humanity is going to come under serious threat. We are already feeling some of the impacts of climate change now, and we have to do something about it. I feel uncomfortable about being an activist. I'm too much of a pacifist to be an activist. But I will advocate. I will talk about it. I will talk about the current situation and the future dangers and our obligation not only to ourselves, but to people and places in distant lands and to our future generations down the line. We have very strong obligations. So I see myself as an advocate. When did I actually feel as an advocate? In 2016, I did a TED Talk, and I spoke about Bhutan. I spoke about, it was such an honor to represent my country in an international platform. And I spoke about our environmental successes, our environmental plans, and we launched something called Bhutan for Life. And incidentally, I talked about the dangers of climate change to Bhutan. The floods, melting glaciers, floods, rising temperatures and all that. And after the talk, I received a lot of emails. Many people contacted me, asking me about climate change, asking me about Bhutan, asking me what they could do. And I did reply to a few of them. But that's when my journey into a climate change advocate actually began.
Perfect. So I'm going to segue into Shooka because I'm going to have to reframe your next question as you're not an activist. But Shooka, what role do you think activism plays in dealing with climate change and trying to actually save our beautiful planet?
Well, I do think that environmental activism plays a crucial role in influencing the legislator to enact the laws that aim to protect our environment. I also think environmental activism or advocacy, I don't know if the term is, sometimes it might be having that negative thought in people's heads just because of the way some of us approach the very same topic. But I also think that environmental activism draws attention to very serious and important matters, mobilizing people and individuals to use their voices and their votes to demand action from the political leaders. It also leads individuals to become involved in other forms of civic engagement, which I think is very important. For example, issues around racial and social justice, which is extremely important. And as you know, environmental issues are often very complex, and they're all required to be viewed from all aspects of social, geopolitical, socioeconomic, and health aspects. And I do believe that environmental activism enables all of that aspects of certain environmental issues to be seen.
So, Tshering, your advocacy, and I also think the advocacy of your kings, have been inspirational. Can I ask you just to tell the people about what has happened in Bhutan and why it's so environmentally friendly and how you've actually kept that going?
The context of Mark's question is that Bhutan is a carbon negative country. We are not just carbon negative, we are heavily negative. We sequester 3 times more carbon dioxide than we emit as a country. True, we are a very small country. We have only 750,000 people in a country the size of Switzerland. But 70% of our country is under forest cover. More than 50% is protected as nature reserves and wildlife sanctuaries. We are a biodiversity hotspot. What alarms me is that today when we talk of being carbon neutral, it is aspirational. Everybody wants to do it in the future. We want to be carbon neutral. We aim to be carbon neutral as a company, as a city, as a county, as a country. But what I find totally unacceptable and alarming is about 150 years ago, every country must have been carbon neutral before the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution has done so much for humanity. Good stuff. Yet, on the other hand, I would imagine that before the Industrial Revolution, every country on the face of the earth was carbon neutral. So why is it that today we are at a place where only one country is carbon neutral, and where carbon neutrality has to be aspirational? We have to make huge sacrifices. That is not acceptable. And this is what we need to think about and work together, and we need to act together so that we can reverse this trend of exponentially growing greenhouse gases every year. We have been fortunate in Bhutan because we've had enlightened leaders in the form of our kings. Now, we are still a distant country, underdeveloped country, but you can imagine, like 40 years ago, 50 years ago, our kings would have been under pressure to cut down our forests, to strip mine our mountains. They refused. At that time, 50 years ago, I would imagine that consultants, economists would be advising them to harvest your timber, to harvest your natural resources. They refused. And it is simply because of their wisdom and their courage to act on that wisdom that today in Bhutan we have an environment that we can be proud of. That today we have more than 70% of the land under forest cover. That today we are still a biodiversity hotspot. And today, unfortunately, we are the only carbon neutral, carbon negative country in the world. So it's because of our kings.
And I have to say that's incredible. If you want to compare that with other facts, the United Kingdom got down to 5% forest cover after the First World War. We're now up to 11%. The average for Europe is about 33% forest cover. So it just shows the difference in development pathways and what inspired leadership can actually do. I'm also going to stick with you, if I may, because Bhutan has this incredible, unique philosophy, and you know where I'm going with this. This is the gross national happiness, which seems to be so logical and key. Could you explain it to the audience? And also, can you give us some hints how we could export it?
I told you I'm not an activist. Anyway, so what is important in life? What is important in our lives? Surely it has to be happiness. I mean, not the immediate, in the moment happiness, joy, ecstasy, this is all very important, but long-term happiness, contentment, life satisfaction. This has got to be important to all of us. If it is important, how do we measure it? We have GDP and GNP, gross national product, that takes stock of a country's wealth, or rather, that takes stock of a country's money, financial wealth. But if happiness is important, do we have a system where countries can take stock of the people, the entire country's happiness? And I think this is the foundation of gross national happiness. I can't preach because I don't know enough about gross national happiness, in a sense that this was the brainchild of our king. Again, in the 1970s, he announced that for Bhutan, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. And ever since, we've been trying to implement this development philosophy that puts at the center of the development agenda people's happiness and well-being. Yes, economic growth is important, but it has to be sustainable, it has to be equitable. Are we there yet? No, we have a long way to go in growing a sustainable economy. But gross national happiness puts people's well-being and happiness at the center of a development agenda by balancing economic growth that is sustainable with social progress through free healthcare, free education, something that you all are familiar with here, but also with the protection of the environment. And growing forests is important all over the world. But protecting Bhutan's forests is critical because our forests are pristine. Protecting the Amazon is critical because it is pristine in a sense that that's how nature has made it happen. It's not planting trees. Planting trees is important. But protecting pristine forests are also important for a whole range of other reasons, including biodiversity. And then there's preservation of culture, and most importantly, for gross national happiness is good governance. And just as a side note, that's how in Bhutan we got our democracy. We didn't fight for democracy. No velvet revolution as such. No revolution, full stop. Our king imposed democracy on the people. So this is all about gross national happiness. How do we export it? It's not a commodity. We can talk about it, right? Mm-hmm. We can exchange ideas. We have so much to learn from all of you. All of us have so much to learn from each other. And yes, if you wish to talk about happiness and gross national happiness, if you want to discuss this, then we can discuss it. But not as an export, as an imposition, as a textbook solution to any challenges that we may have.
I just love the concept, and I really wish that all our politicians would go to bed each night going, how can I make everybody happy tomorrow? Just imagine that world. Right, Shooka, you have worked since 2014 with the climate reality. I'm really interested how that activism works, because it's very different to other groups, but has been highly successful. Why do you think that is?
Since 2016.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I've been corrected.
Just to be precise. Well, I think there are three main reasons for why I think the Climate Reality Project has been successful in terms of activism. And the first and the most important, I think, is the fact that we do strongly believe that in order to win the fight against climate change, we need every single person on this planet. We need urgent action taken at every level of society. We need doctors, we need teachers, lawyers, mothers, fathers, children, TV presenters, journalists, and of course the scientists to give us the facts. But we need everyone. And this is a fact, because without a genuine collective action, we won't be able to win this global challenge. So that's the first thing. Everyone needs to be on this, and everyone needs to be included. The second thing is that it might come as a surprise, because I think especially in the past few years, we have been hearing a lot about climate change. We have been hearing the term climate change a lot, but how much do we actually know about it? Because when you start a conversation with someone about it, you just realize that even sometimes the very basic science of climate change is unknown to many. So what we are most famous for is our very popular, famous climate reality presentation. And the reason for it being very successful is that it's very visual. It's connecting with people through personal stories. And in a simple way, it communicates the clear and simple science of climate change, as well as solutions, and of course, hope for reasons for hope and hope for action. But one of the most important things, and this is the last, third and last reason, is the very important issue of climate justice, equality, and social justice, which have been ignored for decades. And we are now realizing that in order to solve any of the environmental issues that we are facing today, we need to take into account the importance of addressing social injustice and environmental injustice. So we are committed to building a more just and equitable world by a world where all voices are heard and respected, regardless of color, race, religion, gender, sexual identity, nationality, or physical ability. It is at the core of what we do at Climate Reality, because we recognize that a diverse and inclusive movement is critical to solving the climate crisis. And in order to build that winning coalition, we need to ensure that everyone, especially those that have directly been impacted by climate change and have been ignored and excluded previously, are at the center of movement for change.
Fantastic. I'm going to shift gears slightly because I'm going to try to challenge these two wonderful speakers now. So in 2019, Extinction Rebellion burst into the scene, as you all know, and they went with direct action. So they closed parts of central London down for 8 whole days, particularly Oxford Circus. They basically had a beautiful blue ship in the middle of Oxford Circus. And the thing is, I'm being slightly cynical, weirdly enough, sort of like a lot of shoppers thought it was brilliant because it just made shopping so much easier, which I know is slightly against the consumerism they were fighting against. But it was really interesting because it was very, very effective, highly supported by the general population, and has been copied all around the world. So I want to know if either of you actually think direct action protests are important, and if so, how do we get more people, I'm looking at the audience, involved in that? Who wants to take that one first? Oh, I think you've been looked at, Shooka. Yeah, go
May
for
I,
it.
as an activist here, I'm also going to share with you a little story about my encounter with one of the Extinction Rebellion people on the street on one of these days, right at the very beginning and just before the pandemic. We've been invited so many times from their side to be joining their workshops just to see if there are any opportunities to collaborate as the Climate Reality Project. And it was funny because I was just coming back from one of their very big workshops, and obviously they were everywhere on the street. And I was wearing my green pin, obviously. But at the same time, I, picked up a few stickers of XR and I had it on my bag and on my phone. And I was quite enjoying, having a few conversations with the top leaders of the movement. And there was this guy approaching me, all like dressed up, XR, everything. And it was brilliant. And I'm just smiling, walking, thinking, this is good. We're all finally uniting to make a move and make this happen. And then he comes to me, he approaches me and he's like, oh, I see that. You're part of the Climate Reality, aren't you? You capitalists. And I was like, dude, we're on the same page. We are fighting for the same thing. Don't you think we should sort of unite and support each other? So that was quite an interesting encounter. But coming back to what you asked, obviously, I think protests are needed in order to, make sure that our voices are heard and we can actually demand what we need from our world leaders. I'm not quite sure if I personally agree with that sort of an aggressive type of protest, and I'm going to explain to you why. I wouldn't personally take that approach, but I do believe that we need to try all different types of approach to make sure our message gets across. That's very important. And when it all started, it worked brilliantly. But in my opinion, at the moment and at this moment in time, this is really not the right approach. And I tell you why. Because I, as a journalist, interviewed many people when the protests were happening. And at the beginning, many people were on their side. And then as their everyday life started getting very much interrupted by it, I started hearing very different views about it. So what we need to bear in mind, and it is very important, as I mentioned, we need everyone in order to win this, is to keep people and the public on our side. So I don't think creating chaos for the public, which we are hoping to support us, would do us any good. That's my personal opinion.
No, that's fine. So, Tshering, your country is really interesting because I love the fact that the people didn't want democracy. It's like, no, we're quite happy with the king. It's all running well. Please don't change things. So how does the idea of protest fit into your country's sort of, I would say, ideas? And how do you see protests around the world? Do you think they're important? Do we need them?
It depends on the purpose, the objective, the intent, also the sincerity of the protests. In Bhutan, we've been very fortunate that we really did not have any reason to mobilize people on a large scale to protest anything. And that's the way it should be in the world. But unfortunately, reality is otherwise. There's been a lot of protests. From the time of the pharaohs, there have been protests. And a lot of the protests have resulted in a better world, a better society. Today, I think our world is the amount of peace and stability and dignity we enjoy today is because of the hard work and many times because of the sacrifices of people who have gone before us. Today, we need all hands on deck when it comes to climate change. It's all hands on deck because it affects all of us. And if you think it doesn't affect us, we are either wrong or we don't know that it's going to affect our own future generations. And therefore, it's all hands on deck, and everybody must do what you think is best, what you are able to contribute. And some may think that it's going to be organizing mass protests, striking, for whatever reason, to spread, to advocate about climate change, the dangers of climate change. Or it could be to get the attention of the corporate leaders, or to get the attention of political leaders. But something has to be done. It's even more serious now for people who are climate change activists and who are willing to put their lives and their reputation sometimes, but even sometimes their own lives, to fight for climate change, to fight against climate change. I admire them because they are not fighting for anything now. If you fight for women's rights, you're fighting for now. If you fight for to save an old castle, you're fighting for now. But when you say you're fighting, you're striking for climate change, you're fighting for the future. It has nothing to do with now. And that is difficult. And because it's difficult, I think we need all hands on deck. So if some protest, yes, hopefully the outcome of the protest would bring in a lot more benefit, as in what Shooka mentioned. If more people are going to be turned off by that event, then of course you need to rethink your strategy. The idea is to move together as a world, together, to protect our world, to protect our future in this world.
So I'm going to push this a little bit harder, because what's interesting when I'm talking to people this year in 2022, a lot of people are really frustrated by the slow progress that some politicians, and I have to say some because you're here, some politicians are not going as fast as we want them to. And there seems to be a much more confrontational activism developing. I mean, this includes people gluing themselves to motorways to disrupt sort of traffic, to raise awareness of why people aren't insulating their homes. This includes cutting oil pipelines to refineries, letting down tires of large 4x4s, actually, I find that one quite funny, but that's because I've got a sick sense of humour. But it also included running onto the Formula One track when the cars were going around at 200 miles an hour. They were putting their lives on the line to protest. And for me, when we look back at history, there were lots of cases where the fights against slavery, against colonialism, okay, the fight for women's rights, gay rights, and now trans rights, they've all had an aggressive, slightly, I would say, violent arm that's there, because sometimes the elites don't listen. So, and I'm going to start with Shooka. Do you think we need this sort of radical, more aggressive activism?
The question is that, is it actually going to help us achieve what we want right now? The problem with the issue of climate change is that we've waited and ignored it for so long, for decades. And even still, we're not listening to the experts and we're not listening to the science, clearly, because we don't see the world leaders actually taking action. There's a lot of nice talks, but when you really look into it, there are no actual actions. There are, but because we have ignored it for so long, we need immediate action. So I'm not a social scientist, so I can't. It would be nice to actually have a research on this to see if it actually is more productive and would help us get where we want to be as quickly as possible. But I'm not quite sure. What I can do is to, again, share my own experience, because as an activist, obviously, I have been engaged in many different projects. I managed to change the entire school curriculum in so many international schools in Bangkok, Thailand, included environmental studies and earth science into the curriculum, events and campaigns in a way that many of the schools could noticeably cut their carbon footprint. Did the 100% committed campaign here in Europe, and none of that required that kind of approach. But then again, the question is, to me, it's finding the best strategy where you can still have people on your side, the public with you, supporting you. But if that is going to help, if protesting in such a way that it creates chaos for the normal everyday people, I'm not quite convinced if that would get us anywhere at the moment. When it all started, again, it was all great. I was excited. I remember one day I went to work and the CEO of the channel came to me. He was in excruciating pain. He needed to go for his physio. He was in his car for 5 hours and eventually he gave up and he turned around and he went back home and he was like, I'm in pain. I can't go to see my doctor because of this. And there I am as an activist trying to say, but no, it's about what we are fighting for here is the future. It's the next generation. It's what we need, because eventually we're all going to die and be in pain if we don't do anything. But yeah, so it's all about balancing that out, I think. It's very important.
I mean, so huge respect, because you're a pacifist and you have those philosophical views. How is there an alternative to this sort of aggressive activism? How would you frame it? How would you advise young people?
What Shooka mentioned about how do you get people to be excited about, to be concerned about the future? It's fairly easy to get people excited about now. Mm-hmm. It's fairly easy to get people concerned and worried and fearful and anxious about the now. How do you get people to be concerned about the future and to commit to acting on that future in the spirit of hope and optimism? How do you get people to act on their future without spreading fear and suffering now? And Shooka mentioned it's the balance. We've got to balance it. When we talk about fighting slavery, it affects each if we were at that era, it would affect each and every one of us, either as slaves or as owners of slaves or as friends of slaves. And therefore, we are spurred into action. With climate change, it's a little difficult. If you're talking of women's rights, I mean, I may be a man, but I'm married, I have a wife, I have a daughter, I have a mother. I want them to enjoy the same rights as me. So if I see somebody who's destructive to get the attention of the centers of power, I can understand that. But if somebody is destructive and tells me, your unborn children and their unborn children are going to suffer and therefore I'm going to do this, many of us is going to find it's going to be difficult to resonate with many of us. And I think that knowledge, understanding, perhaps is important as we advocate the urgency of fighting against climate change. It is urgent. The problem is, unlike all the other fights, it's not about now. It's about the future. And that's what makes this fight extremely difficult. It's extremely urgent as every fight that we have had. But it's difficult because we are fighting for the future. It's unacceptable today that we even have to think about this, about fighting, striking, because we've grown up as a society now. We have elections, most of us. If we care, elect for the right government, elect the right politicians. We are all consumers. If we care, buy the right product or reject the wrong product. We really don't need to spread fear and suffering. We can achieve the same means, same end, I think, through very peaceful means. And chief among that today, if we are a democracy, it is voting. If you are a consumering society, it is buying. Use that to make a point.
I have to say, I completely agree. I'm going to ask, I think, one last question of both of you. I mean, Shooka, you work in the media as an environmental correspondent. Tshering, you have been a politician and you've lived and breathed media every day. Can I ask you, how can we improve the media coverage of activism? Because it seems to be on occasions very negative, and therefore the messages are getting lost. I'm gonna cheat and start with you, Shooka, because this is your field, this is your bread and butter.
You start all questions with Shooka.
You obviously know my household. Go, so Shooka,
You're
please.
very kind. Thank you. First of all, as an environmental activist who also works in media, I've always tried to raise awareness in the society and empower individuals, because I think that is extremely crucial to what we're doing here in terms of climate change and what we are hoping to achieve. And then again, one thing that I have been struggling, I've been working for Monato TV for the past 4 years, and it has been incredible to basically have a wider audience to be able to raise awareness and educate. But it's also at the same time very challenging, especially for countries like my hometown, Iran, or many other developing countries where they have, I wouldn't say more important issues, because to me, I think climate change is the most challenging, serious issue that we have ever faced, humanity ever faced. But unfortunately, as you mentioned many times, is that we feel and we understand what we see right in front of us. So if a household, if a family in Iran doesn't have food to put on the table for their children, or they're, in a country where there is no freedom of speech and people can't go out and just talk and say what they want, unfortunately, the issue of climate change is never the priority. So how to make that relatable and how can we connect with people? That's always been the big question mark for me, because I've been trying so hard to tell everyone, it's important, trust me. It's not happening. Well, it is happening right now in so many places on Earth, but we always talk about projections in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. But I'm like, come on, guys, it's now, it's happening. We need to do something about it. What I've been trying to do is, again, it might come as a surprise, but what we lack in our society is the realization of that interconnectedness between us humans and the environment. We are part of the environment. Environment is in us and not outside of us. And if we understand that, then we realize that with every action we take, we vote either for or against the kind of world we wish to live in. Every action impacts the planet. And if we understand that environmental degradation is affecting and is going to directly affect our health, our children's health, and our livelihoods and the economy, I think that is when we can grab people's attention. Because not everyone is an animal lover like myself. Not everyone cares for the trees being cut down. Some people's like, well, oh, the polar bears, it's happening miles away from me. What do I care? But we all care about ourselves. We all care about our children. So if we can make that interconnectedness clear, then we can connect with people and tell them why it is an important matter and why we must act now.
Tshering, anything you'd like to add to that?
There's really nothing to add.
Well, if there's nothing
to cover everything, yeah.
I agree. What I was going to suggest is, if you may, can we take some questions from the audience? So we have revolving mics somewhere, and I saw where are the hands. Put your hands up so I can see you all. Right. So there's a hand here. Please ask.
Thank you. I have a question on Mr. Tobgay. You talk about happiness. Are you happy? And if so, what makes you happy?
You've stolen my last question, haven't you?
I'm sorry.
We've had this before.
What makes me happy?
Yeah.
So Mark asked me this yesterday, and I said, what makes me happy? It depends on the definition of happiness, right? If I want to feel happy in the moment, I know that walking in the woods, not alone, but with my wife, and holding her hand, and she holding mine, that makes me very happy.
Okay, see, you now have it on camera, okay? We have it recorded. Brilliant. Right, there's another question here.
Thank you very much. It's a really interesting conversation. On the point of activism, I think the speakers have characterised some activism on the streets as being aggressive. I wonder whether another way of characterising it is of being disruptive, and in terms of non-violent civil disobedience. And that to begin the conversations that we need to have in society with politicians, with people, with organisations, there needs to be a certain amount of disruption, because the status quo, it feels like, is continuing. And civil disobedience on the streets, disrupting that status quo, is a way to begin those conversations. Now, sometimes that might mean that people aren't on our side initially, but that might mean the beginning of a conversation where we can diplomatically come to a negotiation.
Shooka, do you want to take that one? Start off with about disruption?
I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. I don't know. I really wish there was a social study and research on this to actually see which way we can benefit from it more. My fear, only because I have interviewed people because of my job, my fear, it started sort of making me feel very much concerned by pushing people away. If, again, at the end, this would help us get to that negotiation that we need with the world leaders, why not? Because I keep saying we need to demand the world leaders. We need to make sure that our voices are heard. Whether or not by disruption we can get there, and I said at this moment in time, I'm not convinced it's the right move and strategy, because when it started, it was brilliant. We had, I myself was super excited because then we had the declaration of a state of emergency here in the, back home in the UK. And that was amazing. And I thought, that is it. We're on the road. We're getting somewhere. It's happening. And then things slowed down. And the movement carried on doing what they do. But it, I'm just very much scared that this is not, at the moment, it is not a good approach for us, but I might very much be wrong. I'm not, this is just a personal opinion.
Yeah, I think it's important, yeah. I agree with you. The problem is, as Shooka mentioned, are you achieving your objective? But you mentioned that it will spark a discussion. If it does, good. When you're disruptive, leaders, whether they're political leaders or commercial leaders, corporate leaders, will listen to you, will hear you only if the people actually hear you first. They are scared not about you and the disruptors, they are scared about the people at large. They are scared about the voters, the consumers. And as long as you're disruptive, when you're disruptive, if the masses really don't agree with you, the leaders don't care. Now you mentioned something very important. However, it could be the start of a conversation. The question is, where will the conversation go? Will the conversation go in your direction? Or will the media take it in the other direction? Will the media sensationalize what is happening rather than really dig deep into what you want to, your message? And this is the problem with media. Right now, we are in the age of sensationalization. And even the media is into sound bites and picture bites. They want to flash images in front of us. Very short, very quick. And you don't do that on a discourse. You do that on something that's very, very disruptive. And that message spreads, but unfortunately could spread in a manner that you don't want it to spread.
Hands.
I've got it back here.
Oh, great.
I wanted to caution Tshering about broadcasting to this group about 70% of the forests. This is a nation of mushroom hunters. They will pick your country clean if they know there's that much forest to be found. So please be careful. I'm going to play the pessimist here. I look at this problem. This has been a brilliant discussion. I look at this problem a little bit like I look at personal health issues. People still smoke. They eat sugar. They drink too much. They do all the things they know they shouldn't do because the effect is down the line. It's in the future. It's tomorrow. I don't need to worry about it. And then there's a rush to fix the problem when it's too late. When is it time to stop putting our trust into the activism to stop it and maybe start talking about our ways to adapt to it?
Ooh. Do we stop climate change or do we adapt? Oh, that's yours, Shooka,
well,
definitely.
This is again another discussion. I get this question a lot. We need both. We need to stop climate change. Well, unfortunately, we can't stop it. I'm going to be very careful. I have a climate scientist standing right here, whereas my field is just sustainability. But I also do a lot of research in the field of climate change. It's about mitigation and adaptation. We need them both hand in hand. We need to massively cut down our emissions. We also need to absorb some of it in order to prevent the worst from happening, But at the same time, because what we have done at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we are just starting to see a little bit of what we have done decades ago. We are still going to see the impacts of climate change and what has been done previously in years to come. And therefore, we need to adapt, because whether we like it or not, so many places, and already we are seeing this in Bangladesh, India, the Philippines, places that have been impacted by climate change, sea level rise, flooding, droughts in my home country, record high temperatures. So of course we need to adapt. That is important for our survival, but also we need to massively cut down emissions if we want a future for humanity.
So the question I want to throw back to you is, how on earth can you adapt to something like this? The latest UN IPCC report says that if things carry on as they are, without any mitigation, we are headed for a 4 degrees Celsius increase by the end of the century. 4 degrees. I mean, the issue of adaptation doesn't arise. It's going to be difficult to live. We can't adapt to that. Sugar. Your body can't adapt to sugar. Your body can use a reasonable amount of sugar, which is very good. But sugar in excessive amounts is not adaptable. You just get diabetes. And you live a miserable life. A miserable life. We have a lot of mushrooms in Bhutan. Okay. And you are not invited. So our biodiversity is pristine. We are a hotspot, and we take it as a responsibility to protect it. And so we have not prospected all the mushrooms that we have. My hope is that our forest will have a medicine for the future. Who knows? Who knows? But if we have large-scale prospecting, people coming in and just willy-nilly going around harvesting mushrooms, I think it's very dangerous. One of the beauties about our forest cover is that it is pristine. And because it is pristine, it is brimming with mushrooms. Hopefully many of them that we don't know, and hopefully all of them are poisonous.
I have to say that this has probably been one of the best sessions that I've ever had the pleasure of moderating with two incredible speakers, but I'm going to cheat. I'm going to have the last question. And I'm going to look at both of you, and you both have to blink first to see who's going to ask it, is going to answer it, okay? I really want to know, what keeps you optimistic? I mean, we've looked at all the issues. Is it adaptation? Are we going to change? Are we human enough to actually deal with these problems in the future? So what, on those dark nights and days, what keeps you optimistic?
I believe we both need to answer this question from two different points of view. So, sorry, I'll be quick.
No, don't be. Answer the question.
At the end of the day, obviously, my work requires a lot of collaboration with, world-leading experts and climate scientists. And I'm a geek when it comes to reading scientific papers. Love it. I read them, and then I simplify them, and then feed them to my audience. And I'm not going to lie. Sometimes, I don't know how you guys do it, seeing the facts, seeing the projections, and the depth of the problem is terrifying, and it scares me. But for me, I think it comes down to every person's personality. I'm not someone who gives up easily. And I think there is a problem. There is no reason we can't solve it. Obviously, environmental issues are often complex, as I mentioned. We might not be able to solve everything, but we can definitely make sure that we can prevent the worst from happening. And even if I'm being a little bit, I'm not going to say pessimistic, but an optimistic realist, because you need to definitely have the facts, taken into account. We can still prevent the worst from happening if we act now. So it's me, I think, as a human being, I like to call myself a civilized human being and a responsible citizen, I think no matter what, it is my responsibility to do and try my hardest and do what I can to make this happen. And you know what? I do believe that if we really want something, we can achieve it. Nothing is impossible.
Tshering, you have the last word, sir.
Thank you. There's no last word in the fight against climate change. We're just getting started. And so, this is what keeps me optimistic. Mark is what keeps me optimistic. He authored this book, right? Shooka is what keeps me optimistic. Yeah, and the gentleman there, you keep me optimistic. The fact that we are having this conversation keeps me optimistic. COVID keeps me optimistic. I mean, look at us. We've forgotten about COVID. It was the biggest pandemic to hit us out of nowhere. None of us were prepared. 2 years down the line, it's like gone. Why? Because of the human spirit. Governments could have done a little, cooperated a bit more, various governments. But when push came to shove, everybody took care of their own people, as I suppose they must. But the fact is, 2 years down the line, COVID is still around, but look at us. This is the human spirit. This is what's going to get us through the next century too. The question is, how brutal do you want it to be? Do you want it to be easy? And do you want a survival to be an enjoyable experience? Or do we want to hog up all the enjoyment, our generation, and leave the drudgery to the next few generations? They will survive. They will be able to fight climate change. And we will bring down the greenhouse gas levels also. However, how much pain do you want to put yourselves and your future generations, our future generations through? I think that is the question. So we are going to survive. That keeps me optimistic.
Thank you so much. Can I give you Tshering and Shooka?